tutorial is to apply the Keynesian economic tools to understand the Greece's economy. We'll try and apply the Keynesian tools to understand as to why, as far as the economy of Greece is concerned, a bailout package is going to be counterproductive. We are looking at the period before 2009. This was the first time that the crisis happened in Greece. And in order to understand, in order to come to the Keynesian tools, let us first look at some of the parameters pre-2009 in the erstwhile Greece. As you can see, if we look at the economic condition pre-crisis, that is the first crisis of 2009, this is a diagram which shows the real GDP growth and what are the different contributions to this growth. Before the crisis year, before 2009, 2008, you can see that the domestic demand is a major portion from where GDP is coming. The domestic demand is sort of acts as a backbone to the GDP. But when it comes to the year 2008, the domestic demand dwindles a lot. So this is one very important feature of the Greece's economy to understand. Just in the pre-crisis year, the contribution of domestic demand to Greece's GDP or Greece's national income dwindled to a very minimal level. The other aspect is that Greece's economy adopted a very expansionary fiscal policy, which meant that the borrowings went on increasing. Now, the impact of expansionary fiscal policy was, as you can see, the public balance, which is the deficit, was always in negative figures. It increased to a peak in 2004. This was the time of Olympics, and later on it remained at a very high of -5%. The government debt was, as a percentage of GDP, even in 2008, 97.6%. The credit to domestic enterprises was 54.5%, and the credit to households was 48.2%. By 2008, the net savings of the economy was -2.7% of the GDP, and the net borrowings of the economy was 11% of the GDP. So, although an expansionary fiscal policy was carried on, it was being carried on at the expense of borrowing, heavy governmental borrowing. If you look at the parameters of Greece vis-a-vis the rest of the world, we look at the current account balance and its components. And as you can see here also, the current account balance kept on dwindling by the year 2008. The goods account balance, the balance of trade, it progressively became negative, and by 2008 it came into the negative domain. The yellow bars are the balance of trade account. To a certain extent, it was balanced by some amount of positive inflow into the services account, mainly tourism, but overall the current account balance, which is a combination of balance of trade and services, suffered a decline. As a result, because of expansionary fiscal policy and so much of indebtedness, the gross external debt position of the Greek economy also was very precarious. As you can see in these figures, by 2009, the total debt of the government as a percentage of the entire economy as a percentage of GDP was 149%, out of which the governmental debt was 79% and the rest of the economy debt was 70%. In 2008, 149% of the GDP was debt. So that is a very debt trap kind of situation to be in for an economy like Greece. Now, Greece was a part of Eurozone, and there was a negative impact of that as well. So Greece, because of being a part of Eurozone, had an exchange rate which was virtually independent of country's external position. Although we saw that the country was progressively declining in balance of trade, in spite of that, the exchange rate, which was euro, the foreign exchange for the currency for Greece was euro. It was independent of the country's external position. The result was that the current account situation deteriorated further, because under a situation when balance of trade is declining, current account is declining, current account deficit is rising. Under that situation, Greece's currency should have depreciated, but it did not. As a result, the reason was that Greece's currency was euro, and euro gained its strength from other eurozone countries. So the current account situation for Greece deteriorated further because of this currency. Participation in the eurozone meant that country risk was minimized. As being a part of eurozone, it was taken as an entity of eurozone rather than a single country in itself. So the country risk was also minimized, and therefore all the public and private companies of Greece could secure loans at very low interest rates, which were applicable to other euro countries, because the country was seen not as risky as it individually was. It was a part of a big conglomerate. The impact of this we can see when we compare the yields of Greece and the German yields. As you can see, there was hardly any difference between the yields of Germany and the yields of bonds of Greece. It is only when the crisis years approached that there was a divergence of yields. Otherwise, both the yields moved in together. There was hardly any difference between the interest rates in Germany and the interest rates in Greece. Now, the inflation rate though differed greatly. There was no difference between the interest rates, but the inflation rates differed greatly. Between 2002 and 2007, the mean inflation rate was 3.4% in Greece against the euro mean of 2.2%. So the inflation rate was higher than the other euro countries. Now this was not getting reflected in the difference in the interest rates. The yields moved in together. This was creating an anomaly. Now that meant that low interest rates which discouraged savings and encouraged borrowings. Now because of this, people in Greece, with inflation high, interest rate at the same euro level, their real interest rates were low, so there was no incentive or lesser incentive to save. There were more incentive to borrow because money was coming very, very cheap. Now coming to the macroeconomics of fiscal stimulus, a large part of the money that went in after the crisis to bail out Greece was spent in giving all the loans back or servicing the debt. A small portion of the bailout money went as fiscal stimulus. Now this was bizarre, because only a very, very small portion went as fiscal stimulus. However, we still ask the question whether that small fiscal stimulus, whether did it work in the case of Greece or not. So in order to do that, we have applied the Keynesian tools and the Keynesian tool of consumption function, Keynesian tool of multiplier. So let us say that the government spending equals delta G at the beginning of the period J. Now the impact on GDP through the multiplier would be Kj times delta G, where Kj is the multiplier. Okay. So multiplier times whatever is the spending is the impact on GDP. Now, since the entire fiscal expansion is financed by government borrowing, so we can safely say that this change in government expenditure, which is delta G, okay, this change in government expending, which is delta G, is equal to delta GD, because the entire fiscal expansion is financed by governmental borrowing. Okay. So this delta GD reflects what has been the increase in government debt, and the entire government debt is going into financing the fiscal expansion. Now, if we say that AJ is the proportion of new government debt that is purchased by foreigners, okay, of all the government debt, let's say some proportion AJ is purchased by foreigners. Then we would say that this proportion AJ into the entire governmental spending is equal to delta EDJ, where delta EDJ is the augmentation of the country's external debt resulting from fiscal stimulus. Okay. If a portion of the governmental spending is coming out of foreigners, so this proportion into total government spending tells me what has been the addition to country's external debt because of fiscal stimulus, because of the expansionary fiscal policy, what has been the impact on country's external debt. So this gives me that figure. Now, let us say we consider the interest rate as R. Then the outflow of the income due to this expansion would be the entire external rise in external debt into the interest rate R. Okay. Now, we have already said that this rise in external debt is equal to some proportion AJ times delta J. So, therefore, R into delta EDJ is equal to R into AJ delta G. Now, therefore, what is the change in income? The change in income delta Yj, this Y represents income, is multiplier Kj times the change in government spending minus whatever has gone out. This part is the addition to national income, and this part minus multiplier times the interest rate times delta Gj is the part that has gone out because of our external debt servicing. If we assume that the interest rate increases by an amount S in the following period, then the interest outflow would be equal to, let's say the interest rate was R, let's say 10%, and in the next year it increased by 1%, so it became 11%. So the outflow is going to be R plus S times delta EDJ, and we apply the same equation. Instead of R times this, we have added R plus S times RAJ delta GJ. Now therefore plus an amount S delta EDJ minus 1 on the pre-existing debt. The debt which was pre-existing before the interest rise, okay, if it has been contracted on a floating rate, then there is an additional amount on the pre-existing external debt that is also going to go out. Okay. Now, this amount is going to be substantial, given that in 2008, 149% of the GDP was the external debt position, was the debt position of the government. So, coming back to the Keynesian tools, in the public sector, the reduction of output is going to be multiplier times R plus S AJ delta GJ plus whatever that has been on the previous debt. So, this entire thing is going to reduce my output, and let us say where this P is the share of public sector in external debt. Okay. The impact on private sector consumption and reduction of output is going to be, this is the marginal propensity to consume, Cj is the marginal propensity to consume of the private sector, times S, 1 minus P is the share of the private sector into EDJ minus 1. Therefore, the net effect on output equals this final equation. This is what is coming in, this entire thing is what is going out from the public sector as well as the private sector. This represents what is the expansion in the economy. The entire term, negative terms, represents what is going out of the economy because of the external borrowings. Now, we have taken some numbers to understand the same equation. What we have done is we have put the value of K, that is multiplier S2, okay, and we have said that what if interest rate doesn't increase at all in the subsequent years, then the multiplier effect is going to be 2%, the leakage part, the negative part in that equation is going to be minus 0.1%, and overall impact on income is going to be 1.9%. However, if the interest rate rises by 1% also, Okay. So, let us say everything is the same, but the interest rate rises by 1%. Under that situation, the money that comes in through the multiplier effect, it is going to give a growth of 2%, but what goes out is 2.36%. So, the economy shrinks by negative 0.36%, and if the interest rate goes up by 2, of course, what comes in is 2%, but what goes out is minus 4.62%. So, the economy shrinks by minus 2.62%. Now, let us go back to the diagram which we saw in terms of interest rate. Post 2008, suddenly you can see that there is a great divergence between interest rates of Greece and Germany. The interest rates in Greece started going up. Now, one can understand that the interest rates as post 2008 started going up. When we looked at the last slide, if the interest rate rises by 1 basis point also, the economy shrinks. The result was that when this kind of stimulus was given to the Greek economy, it actually shrunk. And therefore, such kind of bailouts in an economy which is heavily dependent on debt, especially external debt, it doesn't help. Thank you.